My name is Fiza, and I grew up in a house that smelled of perfume, secrets, and silence. I was the eldest of four children, two brothers and a sister, but the only one who knew who her father was. The others never asked. They thought such questions were forbidden. Our mother was a woman of strange habits. Every few weeks, she would bring a new maid into the house, give her instructions to take care of us, and then lock herself in her room for hours. When she came out, she looked like a bride, her skin glowing, her eyes lined with kohl, her hands heavy with gold bangles. A familiar perfume filled the air, the kind that stayed long after she had gone. Then, dressed in bright clothes and carrying a small suitcase, she would leave without telling us where or for how long. As children, we never questioned it. We waited. A month later, sometimes 6 weeks, she would return, smiling, radiant, and carrying shopping bags full of clothes, sweets, and toys. She would shower us with gifts, feed us biryani, and laugh as though nothing had happened. The house came alive again. For a while, it almost felt like love. But as I grew older, that love began to feel hollow, like a well that echoed but held no water. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, wondering where she went and why she always came back with more than she had taken. Once I asked her directly, why do you leave so often? She smiled and touched my hair. Because when I return, she said, you smile again. It was an answer meant to soothe a child, not satisfy a daughter's curiosity. When I turned 15, I began to notice a pattern. A man would start visiting our house, always rich, always generous. He would bring chocolates, toys, and sometimes even jewelry. For a few weeks, he would come often, talk softly to my mother, take her out, make her laugh. Then one day she would disappear, just like before. And when she returned, he was gone, replaced weeks later by another. I started to feel something dark in my chest, a mixture of fear, shame, and disgust that I didn't yet have words for. I didn't know what sin was, but I knew whatever was happening in our home was not pure. That was the beginning of my questions and the slow death of my innocence. The truth came to me not from my mother, but from a friend. One afternoon at school, I found myself unable to hold the confusion anymore. I told my closest friend, Sana, about my mother, how she disappeared like a bride, returned with money, and never spoke of the men who came and went. Sana listened quietly, her eyes growing wider. Then she leaned closer and whispered a word that froze my breath. Muta. I asked what it meant. Sana hesitated, then explained that mut'a was a temporary marriage, an agreement where a woman marries a man for a few days, weeks, or months in exchange for money. When the time ends, the marriage dissolves automatically. It's legal in some places, she said softly, but everyone knows what it really is. The words felt like knives cutting through everything I believed about my mother. I went home in silence that day, watching her as she dressed in front of the mirror, wearing the same bright clothes and that same perfume. For the first time, I didn't see beauty. I saw a woman preparing for a transaction. My heart trembled as I realized what those smiling men had been. Not suitors, but clients. From that night on, I watched her closely. Every movement seemed rehearsed. Every laugh sounded practiced. She spoke with kindness, but her eyes were hollow. When she left again, I sat on her bed and stared at her reflection still trapped in the mirror. Something inside me broke. The respect, the innocence, the belief that mothers were sacred. Weeks later, I found the proof I didn't want. While cleaning her room, I lifted a pillow and found a thick brown folder beneath it. Inside were marriage contracts, like 17 of them. Each one had my mother's name written neatly beside a different man's. Each document carried the same pattern, a short duration, a fixed payment, a date of expiration. I counted them one by one until my hands started shaking. 17 times she had married. 17 times she had sold her companionship. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, my siblings asleep, and I sat by the window staring at the dark street outside. The moonlight touched my face, but it couldn't cleanse what I had learned. My mother, the woman who had given me life, had built our world on rented love. And from that moment, I began to hate the scent of her perfume. The next time my mother left, she brought a new maid to stay with us, a woman around 40 with sharp eyes and a quiet smile that made me uneasy. She worked silently, but there was something about her that felt knowing, as if she carried a secret too heavy to speak. One evening, while I was washing dishes, I found myself muttering under my breath, I don't know when Mother will change, or if she ever will. The maid, standing behind me, said softly, Your mother doesn't want to change. She told me herself what she does. I froze. My hands stopped moving. I turned to face her, water dripping from my fingers. What are you talking about? She shrugged and said calmly, Your mother practices mutta. I tried to stay composed. I've heard that word, I said, but I don't fully understand it. The maid placed her hands in the water, scrubbing a plate as she spoke slowly, as if savoring each word. It's a temporary marriage. A few days, a few weeks, maybe months. The man gives her money. They live like husband and wife until the time ends. No divorce, no court, no drama. Just pleasure, peace, and parting. I felt my face burn. That's not peace, I said sharply. That's selling yourself. The maid looked at me and smiled, but not cruelly, but with pity. You'll understand one day, she replied. Every marriage begins with laughter and ends with tears. At least your mother skips the tears. My anger exploded. You're wrong, I shouted. That's shameful. I'll never be like her. She laughed quietly and said, You're young, beautiful, and stubborn. But remember my words. You will follow her path, and you'll do it even better. You have her eyes, her smile, her fire. Her confidence frightened me more than her words. I stormed out of the kitchen and slammed my door, my heart pounding with fury. That night, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the mirror, whispering to myself, I'm not her. I will never be her. But her reflection lived inside me, her blood, her habits, her silence. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw her face in mine. And for the first time, I realized that hatred can feel terrifyingly close to love. Because both bind you to the person you want most to escape. That night, I stopped calling her mother in my heart. The silence between us grew heavier with time, began to avoid her gaze, speak less, and stay longer in my room. But one afternoon, the years of disgust I had swallowed finally spilled out. She was sitting in the courtyard, painting her nails, humming softly to herself. I stood before her and said, without hesitation, I know what you do. She looked up, her eyes calm, almost amused. And what is it that I do, Faiza? You marry men for money, I said bitterly. You've turned our home into a marketplace. Do you even know who my brother's fathers are? Do you ever think about father's soul and what he must feel seeing this? For a moment, her hands stopped moving. I expected anger, shame, maybe even tears. But she said nothing. No denial, no justification. Her eyes were blank, her face still. Then she whispered, Do whatever you want. Her tone was flat, as if my pain were irrelevant, as if nothing I said could reach her anymore. That night, I wept silently on my bed, clutching my pillow. I realized that the woman I called mother was long gone. What sat in her place was someone hardened by years of choices I couldn't understand. I swore to myself that I would never become her, never sell my body, never stain my soul. Around that time, I began to notice a man from the neighborhood, tall, confident, often driving a black car. His name was Salman. At first, I ignored him, but his eyes always seemed to find me. There was something gentle yet dangerous about the way he looked, as if he saw the sadness I tried to hide. One evening, I was returning from the market when he stopped his car beside me. You shouldn't walk alone, he said. This area isn't safe. I gave a dry smile and replied, I've lived through worse. He laughed softly, and that sound lingered in my mind long after he drove away. For the first time, I felt seen, not as a daughter of shame, but as a woman capable of love. His attention became a small light in my dark world. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could escape the cycle I was born into. But destiny has a cruel sense of irony. The same door I wanted to close forever was already opening again. this time disguised as love. Salman's presence became a quiet addiction. He appeared every few days, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with laughter that softened my defenses. He never asked about my family, and I never told him. It was as if we both understood that silence made things easier. One evening, as we sat near a small cafe at the edge of town, he said gently, "You have sadness in your eyes, Faiza." I looked away. Maybe sadness is the only thing that never leaves me. He smiled and whispered, "Then let me change that." His words, so simple and confident, felt like rescue. I wanted to believe him, to believe that not all men saw women as transactions. I told him I wanted to marry, not for money, not for escape, but for peace. He hesitated, saying his family would never agree. I didn't care. "We don't need anyone's permission," I said. "Just two hearts and a promise." A week later, under a fading sun, we sat before a local cleric in a quiet room. A few papers were signed, words were spoken, and just like that, I became his wife. There was no celebration, no guests, no witnesses, only him, me, and the illusion of eternity. When he slipped a simple silver ring onto my finger, I felt the weight of years lift from my chest. I told myself this was the beginning of purity, that I had finally escaped my mother's shadow. Life with Salman felt like the first breath after drowning. He treated me with tenderness, and I filled his house with warmth. I cooked, cleaned, and waited for him each evening. We would talk until midnight, laugh about meaningless things, and hold each other like the world outside no longer existed. I stopped visiting my mother as often. I told myself that my life was different now, cleaner, honorable, safe. Every morning, I thanked fate for giving me this new chance. For once, I didn't wake to the sound of my mother's perfume bottles clinking or strange men's voices echoing through the house. Instead, I woke to the calm rhythm of a man breathing beside me, a man I believed I could trust. I thought I had won my battle against destiny. I thought love had cleansed what shame had stained. But fate was patient, and it was about to reveal how easily freedom can disguise another kind of cage. It had been just over a month since our marriage, 34 days of fragile peace. Each day felt ordinary yet precious, like something borrowed from a life that wasn't truly mine. One evening, Salman came home earlier than usual. There was a briefcase in his hand and an unusual stillness in his smile. "Come here," he said gently. "I have something for you." I thought it was a surprise, a gift, perhaps jewelry or perfume. My heart fluttered as he placed the briefcase on the table and unlocked it. Neat stacks of cash filled the inside, crisp and freshly bound. Then he pulled out a folded paper and handed it to me. "Here," he said. "This is yours too." When I opened it, the words blurred before my eyes. It wasn't a certificate of love. It was a certificate of ending. A document of divorce. My voice trembled. "What is this?" He leaned back casually as though explaining a simple contract. "Our time together's over," he said. "You asked for 100,000 dirhams as dowry. It's all here." I felt my knees weaken. "You're joking," I whispered. "We're married. Not like that, not for a time." He laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut through me. "You really thought it was permanent?" "Come on, Faiza. We had a muta marriage, a temporary one. That's why we did it quietly. No families, no guests, Anais, just you, me, and an agreement." The air around me seemed to disappear. My heart raced, but no tears came. I could only stare at him, unable to speak. "It was good while it lasted," he continued, "short, simple, and without problems. If we stayed longer, we'd hate each other. This way, we leave with good memories, good memories." The phrase echoed like a curse. Every moment I had thought was sacred. Every laugh, every touch, was a rehearsal of what I had once despised. My mind went blank, my body numb. Without another word, I picked up the briefcase and the paper, walked to the door, and stepped into the night. Outside, the wind felt heavy, the streets too quiet. I walked without direction, clutching the proof of my betrayal. My heart ached with a familiar realization. I had become the reflection I had feared all my life. By the time I reached home, I wasn't Faiza, the wife. I was Faiza, the daughter of the woman I had sworn never to become. When I reached home that night, I was drenched in silence. The briefcase felt heavier than my heart, as if the weight of every lie I had believed was locked inside it. I expected shouting, questions, maybe cruel laughter. But when my mother saw me standing at the door, she only looked at me for a moment and said quietly, "You're back." I stepped in without a word. My siblings ran to me, wrapping their arms around my waist. Their innocent faces were filled with joy, not knowing that the sister they hugged was no longer the same. My mother's gaze followed me as I walked to my room. She didn't ask why I returned, didn't demand an explanation. She just let me be, and that indifference hurt more than any scolding ever could. A few days later, she came to my room carrying 2 cups of tea. She placed them on the table, sat beside me, and opened the briefcase I had thrown in a corner. The same bundles of money stared back at us, the price of my dignity. She smiled faintly and said, "You got more than I ever did." I felt anger rise inside me. "How can you say that?" I asked bitterly. She sipped her tea and replied softly, "Because if that man had stayed longer, he would have broken you piece by piece. Cry for a few days, then stop. Short pain is easier than lifelong suffering." Her words made me tremble. She sounded so certain, as if pain had become a science she had mastered. For the first time, I saw her not as a sinner, but as someone who had given up fighting her own curse. There was no pride in her voice, only exhaustion. That night, when I lay in bed beside my sleeping siblings, I thought about what she said. Maybe she was right. Maybe the world was built to use women like us, to take what it wanted and leave before the damage became visible. Maybe survival meant learning to hurt for shorter periods. But even as I tried to believe her logic, something inside me still bled. I wasn't ready to accept that my life's only choice was between pain and silence. I wanted to believe there was another path, one where love didn't have an expiration date and dignity wasn't bought and sold. Yet, deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "You're already becoming her." Weeks passed like blurred days after a storm. I barely spoke, barely ate. The house smelled of my mother's fading perfume and my own silence. One morning, I went to a clinic, trembling as I handed over my test results. The doctor smiled politely and said, "You're not pregnant." For a moment, relief swept through me. I wouldn't have to carry any piece of Salman within me. But as I walked out into the sunlight, another feeling crept in. Emptiness. It was as if something that was never real had still managed to leave a void behind. When I returned home, life had already resumed its rhythm. My mother was sitting by the window, sewing a dress, while my younger siblings played in the courtyard. I watched them quietly, realizing that their laughter was the only pure sound left in this house. For a few weeks, I tried to live like before, helping with chores, teaching my sister, pretending that everything was fine. But nothing inside me was fine. One evening, as I stood at the balcony, I noticed a young man across the street staring at me. His face was unfamiliar, his eyes curious. The same kind of curiosity I had once seen in Salman's. I looked away instantly, but when I turned back, my mother was standing behind me. Her face was unreadable. "New dreams again?" she asked softly, almost teasingly. I laughed, but it came out hollow. "No dreams this time," I said. "Just a mutta." For a second, she stared at me. And then she laughed, a full, deep laugh that echoed through the empty house. I joined her. We laughed until our eyes filled with tears. It was laughter soaked in tragedy. The sound of 2 women surrendering to the same curse. When the laughter faded, she said, "You see, Faiza? It's easier this way. Less pain, more control." I didn't answer. But something inside me shifted that night. The anger I had carried for years began to dissolve, replaced by a cold understanding. I told myself that maybe my mother had never chosen this life. Maybe life had chosen her, and now it had chosen me. By the next morning, I had stopped fighting. The mirror no longer frightened me. The face I saw there wasn't my mother's anymore. It was mine, calm and accepting. That was the day I crossed the line I once swore I never would. Time moved forward, but the days no longer felt distinct. Each one blended into the next, marked by routine rather than meaning. My mother's face had changed, her beauty had wilted, her eyes carried the dullness of resignation. She no longer went out often. Sometimes she would sit silently in the courtyard for hours, staring at the fading sunlight. It was then I realized that the burden she had carried for years had finally passed to me. I began to manage the house, to meet the people who once came for her. At first, I did it hesitantly, disgusted by the very air around them. But soon, hesitation gave way to necessity. My younger brothers were now in college, my sister's school fees were due, and my mother's medicine bills grew each month. Every sound in the house, the hum of the fan, the rustle of notebooks, the clinking of spoons, magpines, was funded by my silence. Each visit followed a pattern. A stranger arrived, a few words were exchanged, a night passed, and money appeared on the table the next morning. I convinced myself it was just a transaction, like selling time. Nothing more, nothing less. I told myself I wasn't doing it for pleasure, but for survival. That lie became my shield. Yet sometimes, at night, when everyone was asleep, I would sit alone and remember my younger self. The girl who once believed love could save her. I wondered what she would think if she saw me now, bargaining with the same kind of men I used to despise. Perhaps she wouldn't recognize me. Perhaps she would simply turn away in silence. My mother rarely spoke anymore. When she did, her voice carried the weight of fatigue rather than authority. "You don't have to continue," she said once, her tone fragile. "We'll find another way." I smiled faintly and replied, "There is no other way." Deep down, she knew I was right. That evening, I saw her standing by the window, her reflection caught in the glass. For a moment, I saw both of us there, her past and my present, overlapping like two mirrors facing each other, reflecting the same wound infinitely. We were no longer mother and daughter. We were survivors of the same war, fighting on different battlefields, losing the same parts of ourselves every day. And I understood then, survival isn't strength. It's surrender disguised as endurance. The years blurred together like ink dissolving in water. My mother now spent most of her time lying on the old cot near the window, her body frail, her spirit quiet. I often caught her staring at the ceiling as if waiting for forgiveness that would never come. The same perfume that once filled our house with a false sense of beauty now smelled like memory, faint, distant, dying. My brothers had grown tall, busy with studies and dreams that stretched far beyond the walls of this house. My sister talked about becoming a doctor one day, her voice bright with hope. They never asked where the money came from, and I never told them. Their innocence was my last possession, the only piece of purity left in a life built on sin. Each morning, I sent them to school, counted the coins, managed the bills, and answered the knocks at our door. I stopped thinking about love or marriage or salvation. These words belonged to another world, a world where women weren't currency. My own world revolved around survival, repetition, and silence. Sometimes my sister would sit beside me and say, "You work so much, don't you get tired?" I smiled, brushing her hair from her face. "No, I don't." But inside, I was exhausted, not in body, but in soul. I longed for rest, for a day when I could breathe without the weight of shame pressing on my chest. Yet even rest had become a luxury I could not afford. At night, when everyone slept, I would stare at my reflection in the small mirror by the bed. The woman looking back at me was calm, almost expressionless, her eyes neither hopeful nor broken, just still. I realized then that I had stopped dreaming. I no longer wished for a man's love, a child's laughter, or even redemption. The future had lost its meaning. Only the present remained, like a wound that refused to heal. The truth was cruel but simple. This was my life now. My existence had become a trade of dignity for survival, of silence for stability. I told myself that as long as my siblings lived in comfort, my choices were justified. Yet deep within, a part of me still whispered, a faint echo of the girl who once believed in love, purity, and hope. And each time that voice rose, I silenced it the only way I knew how, by becoming exactly what I once swore I would never be.